shooting down a U.S. reconnaissance plane. And in Montreal, a United Nations aviation agency deplores the Soviet attack and orders an international investigation. We'll discuss these developments with Assistant Secretary of State Richard Burt and Federal Aviation Administrator Lynn Helms. Also tonight, divorce mediation, a program designed to avoid bitter court fights and high legal fees in divorce. But is it a dangerous shortcut? We'll talk about it.
This is ABC News Nightline. Substituting for Ted Koppelin, reporting from Washington, Sam Donaldson.
When the news came that Soviet pilots had shot down a Korean airliner on a moonlit night after making visual contact with it, it seemed absolutely implausible to believe the Russians didn't know what they were shooting at. U.S. officials to a person said they must have known. One official, White House Deputy Press Secretary Larry Speaks, said the United States had evidence that was almost irrefutable to prove the Russians knew they were firing on a commercial airliner. Well, it turns out that the U.S. intelligence community now believes the Soviets did not, in fact, know what they were doing. ABC News Pentagon correspondent John McWethy, who uncovered this latest U.S. government analysis, tells us more.
In his speech to the nation 11 days ago, President Reagan left little doubt that in his mind, the Soviet Union knew that it had tracked and destroyed an unarmed passenger liner.
The 747 has a unique and distinctive silhouette, unlike any other plane in the world. There is no way a pilot could mistake this for anything other than a civilian airliner.
Now the U.S. intelligence community has made a new assessment that to some degree contradicts not only the president, but also the Soviets. Did the Russians know it was a passenger liner? The new assessment concludes that from the first, and while the U.S. government was absorbing new intelligence assessments, still more information was being released in 38 seconds after being hit by the missiles. He told Korean control that he was losing cabin pressure. All of his engines were out, and then he said 10-12 Delta, the meaning of which is still unclear. American officials hope that some of the confusion about what happened that night over the Soviet Union will be cleared up if the U.S. can just find the airliner's flight recorder, which is still thought to be somewhere in the Sea of Japan. John McWethy for Nightline in Washington.
With us now in our Washington bureau is Richard Burt, Assistant Secretary of State for European Affairs. Mr. Burt, is the United States government now prepared to say publicly that we simply think the Soviets made a mistake?
No, we're not, Sam, and I think the important point is the point that the Soviets themselves have made, is not whether the Soviets confused that aircraft. I think there's plenty of evidence to suggest that that pilot should have known what he was firing at, but that's not the point. The important point is that there are standard international practices for identifying aircraft, for warning aircraft that wander into Soviet territory over or any country's airspace, and the Soviets simply did not do it.
Well, now, you say the pilot should have known. I suppose there's no disputing that. But the U.S. intelligence analysis that John McWethy just presented to us suggests that the pilots didn't know. Isn't there a difference?
No, I don't think so. I mean, I'm not going to confirm that story. There has been plenty of intelligence analysis.
Are you going to deny it?
I'm not going to deny it. There's a number, and I'm not even aware of any specific report. We're getting new information all the time. But the point, I certainly do not agree that the Soviets thought they were shooting down an RC-135. In fact, what we know is that the Soviets did not even take the trouble to figure out exactly what they were firing at.
Well, had they actually thought, now just for purposes of discussion, that it was a military spy plane from the United States, an RC-135, did they then have the right to shoot it down?
No, they certainly did not have, but I'm not even going to get into that because the real point is that they did not undertake the various procedures which are necessary to determine what that aircraft was. They were fully aware that Korean airlines, several American airlines, several other international airlines flew the flight path from Alaska to Japan to Korea, and to not simply take the necessary procedures to warn that aircraft, to inspect the aircraft, to tell the aircraft that it was penetrating Soviet airspace, but to undertake military tactics to shoot it down is unacceptable.
Okay, they didn't take the procedures to identify it properly. Doesn't that simply make a case for massive Soviet incompetence?
I don't think it makes the case for massive Soviet incompetence when the Soviet foreign minister at the Madrid Conference of Foreign Ministers a week ago told the world not only that the Soviets shot that plane down, but that if it happened again, they'd do it again.
All right. We want to talk to you.
That's the central political point here, Sam.
All right, Mr. Secretary, we want to talk to you in a few minutes about the latest action that you transmitted to the Soviet government concerning the ability of Soviet diplomats to land in New York or New Jersey for United Nations Assembly session. If you'll just stand by, we'll be back to you in a few minutes. When we return, an agency of the United Nations deplores the downing of the Korean airliner and calls for an independent investigation. We'll talk with the head of the Federal Aviation Administration. And later, we'll examine a different approach to divorce, one that may be cheaper and less traumatic for all involved.
An idea begins. The ultimate microwave cookware system. Form follows function, and beyond, to durability, to versatility, with a limited number of pieces performing an infinite number of tasks. The ultimate microwave cookware system is from Rubbermaid. Quite understandably, nothing else stacks up to it.
Do you know me? I launched some of the most famous shows on TV. Still, no one knows my FACE. But the American Express card can change that. Because far away, or even on my favorite street, this spells out who I am.
What's one thing to do to apply for the card? Take one.
The American Express card. Don't leave home without it.
Bye-bye.
Pacific Datsun has over 100 used cars and trucks, stretching over one full city block. I'm Jerry Deneen, General Manager of Pacific Datsun. Of course, we have used Datsuns, Toyotas, and Mazdas. We also have Buicks, Cadillacs, Chevys, Dodges, Fords, Mercurys, Lincolns, Oldsmobiles, and Pontiacs. And trucks, Datsuns, Toyotas, Mazdas, Chevys, and Fords. Remember, if it's not good enough for my daughter, I won't sell it to anyone.
Hi, Dad.
If you want higher interest, there's one place that's cracked right through the short-term CD interest ceiling. Central Savings.
News is really a mirror held up to society. It shows us who we are, how we are, and what we're doing.
We bring you face to face with the world. ABC's World News Tonight, weeknights with Peter Jennings.
Just days after the Korean airliner was shot down, the United States, armed with tape-recorded evidence of Soviet responsibility for the attack, eagerly pressed its case before the United Nations Security Council. Although the U.S. and its allies mustered enough votes to condemn the Soviet action, the Soviet Union predictably vetoed the measure. So today, the United States and its co-sponsors turn to a UN body where the Soviets do not have a veto, an agency that coordinates international aviation. We have a report from Steve Shepard.
It was a bad day for the Russians in Montreal. Late this afternoon, the Governing Council of the International Civil Aviation Organization overwhelmingly passed a resolution deeply deploring the shooting down of Korean Airlines Flight 007.
26 in favor, 2 opposed, and 3 abstentions.
The resolution, offered by Canada and supported by the U.S. and 24 other nations, states that using such armed force against a civilian airliner is incompatible with the norms of international behavior and a grave threat to the safety of international aviation. Today's resolution, opposed only by the Soviet Union and Czechoslovakia, also directs the ICAO to begin a thorough and impartial investigation of the tragedy. Most delegates seem to think that this afternoon's vote had done something, at least, to satisfy the world's conscience.
The world public opinion has shown its determination, its universal conscience against such unconscious unconscionable attack and use of a military armed force against the civilian airplane.
The Council has now, in its opening paragraph, named Russia, without any exception, the Soviet Union, as the nation that shot down the airplane, has established that a legal basis for consequences has already existed, and an investigation should in fact be undertaken.
But the practical effects of today's vote are limited. There is no indication it will change in any manner the way the Soviet Union intercepts off-course civilian airliners. And neither is there much hope that the ICAO investigation ordered by today's vote will uncover much new information about the tragedy. Any international investigation will depend to a large extent on Russian help, and Soviet authorities aren't expected to be cooperative.
But the ICAO was not designed to solve the world's political problems. It is not an organization meant to resolve differences between major powers like the United States and the Soviet Union. The ICAO can vote to deplore the destruction of Korean Airlines Flight 007, but ultimately, there's not a whole lot more it can do about it. Steve Shepard for Nightline, Montreal.
With us now in our Washington Bureau is Federal Aviation Administrator J. Lynn Helms, who led the U.S. delegation to today's meeting of the International Civil Aviation Organization in Montreal. Mr. Helms, did you accomplish everything you wanted to in Montreal? After all, the organization deplored the Soviet action but did not condemn it.
I think it was probably one of the more successful efforts that the United States has had in world international deliberative bodies. First, because of the very high ratio, which you noted, all votes but two. Secondly, the speed. But from our viewpoint, what people didn't recognize was you can't go into a meeting like that and announce in advance what your objectives were. If you study that language, you'll see that it precisely met all of the objectives that the president originally set down and allowed us to accomplish this under Secretary Shultz's guidelines. When he first heard about the atrocity, the president had no hesitancy. He said, that's absolutely deplorable.
All right, this particular body now has held the Soviets up to world defaming and has made it very clear that the Soviet action is unconscionable. But what can be done about it beyond the words?
Well, as a matter of fact, there are some things that can be done about it. The important thing, however, is you can take no action until you get this resolution through. This is probably the strongest resolution that ICAO has ever passed in advance of an investigation. Now,
okay, what's the follow-up then?
What are the consequences? You'll notice in that language it says that an interim report will be issued within 30 days. Let's suppose that in the next 30 days, the Russians make the decision, which you said they might, to not cooperate. Now ICAO can start to vote them out of Category 1 and to Category 2. There are 3 categories. If they still do not respond, they can be voted into Category 3. What this means is Russia would slowly start to be isolated from all of the technical information, from all the standards, from all the instrument procedures, everything which they absolutely must have to fly internationally. And the strong unanimity which existed today indicated that ICAO this time is willing to do it.
Well, now, do you have any indication the Russians will cooperate? They've already said they have their own investigation going, and that's all that's necessary.
I haven't found that I can ever depend on the Russians' word. So if they said that they won't, that doesn't mean to me that they won't. The pressure this time is going to be stronger than it ever has.
So you think being thrown into Category 3, losing all these advantages, all of this ability for international cooperation in the airline field, will force them to cooperate in an investigation that will show that they had done something that was heinous?
These are the sort of things which you apply step by step. We couldn't have done any of that without a strong resolution which embodied the very principles which we had and directed an ICAO investigation. I think you'll find this is probably the strongest resolution that's ever come out. And as I said, it'll set the framework so every 30 days, every 90 days, if they don't respond, another turn of the screw can go on.
Mr. Helms, are you making any progress in any other forums and in any of diplomatic channels toward trying to find ways to make certain that this never happens again through more agreements with other nations and perhaps even with the Soviets?
Well, the proper channel to do this, of course, is the ICAO. However, those other channels would be more properly in the purview of the State Department. We do not get involved in those type of bilateral talks. We have continuing technical discussions with all the other nations of the world. But there are a large number of ICAO technical panels. The Russians would slowly start to be excluded from that.
By the way, I was just going to ask you about another thing you did in Montreal. You and the president today both said that in 1988, when our navigational satellite system becomes available, that we would make available to commercial aviation around the world this three-dimensional ability to see where you are at any given moment. And my question to you is, does that include the Soviet airline Aeroflot?
Well, that'll be the president's final decision. Mine is to make sure that it works technically in conjunction with the interagency group. But the United States has never held back when it involves civil aviation. We've never held back because that means international safety. And my judgment would be, yes, we'll make it available to anybody. But at the same time, without the technical standards to build the airborne equipment, that is equipment that goes in the airplanes, they couldn't use it anyway. And they can only get those standards by being part of ICAO.
Thank you very much, Mr. Helms, for being with us tonight. In a moment, other ways in which the United States and its allies have responded to the Korean airline disaster. We'll talk again with Assistant Secretary of State Richard Burt. And later, we'll look at divorce mediation, a different approach that some say is cheaper, faster, and less painful.
There's more for your dollar right now at Sears' 97th anniversary sale. Like interior latex paint, now half price. And try this on for size. Classic corduroy women's blazers, just $24.99. And walk off with some special purchases. Men's genuine leather dress shoes, just $29.99. And these automatic blankets, a comfortable $19.99. And there's more. Hundreds of values you won't want to miss, cause there's more for your life. On sale this week. At Sears.
There he is, the red-winged blackbird. And there he goes. You want some coffee?
Love some. Just half a cup. Caffeine, you know.
But this is New Brim decaffeinated coffee.
New Brim?
Now there's a new, rich, roasted taste that really satisfies. New Brim.
It tastes this rich. Fill it to the rim.
Try the new, rich, roasted taste of Brim.
Here we are at Pacific Scenes, New Mariposa Townhomes at Mission Pacific. You're looking at a campout where home buyers line up for days prior to the opening of a new development.
160 Mariposa Townhomes have sold in the 7 months since we made that commercial. Look at Mariposa today. The homes are beautiful, so are the values. See the Pacific Scene ad in the Sunday paper. And as I said 7 months ago,
Pacific Scene has the right homes in the right locations, and the values, they're extraordinary.
I'm Rose Tatino. My husband and I first made our pizza over 30 years ago in our restaurant. Two things we believed in: be the best and be generous. And that's how I've made my new deluxe pizza.
Introducing My Classic Pizza by Rose Totino. Tender crust, rich tomato sauce, lots of terrific toppings. A pizza with perfect balance. Try My Classic Pizza by Rose Totino.
Enjoy.
Edge Chevy S10 depreciated nearly $1,000 in 1 year. In 7 years, my brother's 77 Datsun depreciated only $1,400. That's why I bought a new Datsun. Because Datsun quality pays off where it counts, protecting your investment. And factory-sponsored 8.8 financing makes buying easy. You'll appreciate trucks that hardly depreciate. And that's not a lot of hot air.
See the new 83.5 pickups at your nearby Datsun dealers.
I'm David Hartman. Monday on Good Morning America, full coverage of the continuing problems in Lebanon. And we'll talk with a man accused of faking his own death to collect insurance money on Good Morning America.
Sunday on This Week, we'll question another candidate for president, Walter Mondale.
The latest U.S. action against the Soviets because of the Korean airliner came today. Moscow was informed its diplomats coming to the United Nations General Assembly session later this month cannot arrive in a Soviet airline Aeroflot plane. And if they come in an official government plane, they cannot land at a civilian airport. Assistant Secretary of State Richard Burt delivered this news to Soviet officials, and he is with us again to discuss it. Mr. Secretary, why did you do it?
Well, it was obviously inconsistent, Sam, with the decisions that the United States and several other countries have taken on suspending flights for Aeroflot. We have worked closely with our allies and other countries to send a political signal, in part to support Lynn Helms and the work he's been doing at ICAO and the meeting they've had in Montreal, but to demonstrate to the Soviets that business as usual with Soviet civil aviation will not go ahead.
Now, Mr. Secretary, there is a report, one story, that the administration was willing to let Soviet Foreign Minister Andrei Gromyko and certain other diplomats land, but it was the governors of New York and New Jersey who said, no, you can't land at our civilian airports, and Washington went along with it. Comment?
Well, we were gratified that the governors of New York and New Jersey felt that way, but certainly they didn't spark our actions. We did not want Andrei Gromyko and other Russians to fly into New York on civilian Aeroflot airlines.
Well, now, a spokesman for the UN Secretary General has already suggested that what you have done is in violation of the headquarters agreement, which says, in effect, that we will not bar countries who are accredited to the UN and members from going there.
Well, we're not barring the Soviet foreign minister from coming to the UN General Assembly. We are barring Aeroflot civilian airliners from entering the United States.
Well, how's he going to get there, then?
Well, there are ways that he can come. We are discussing this with the Soviets. We do not want to impede the normal diplomatic state of play in New York. But we do want to create obstacles for civilian Aeroflot aircraft flights into the United States.
Well, now, if he comes in a Soviet official plane, he would have to land where? At a military airfield?
We're discussing this now with the Soviets, Sam, and at this point, I really don't think it's appropriate to talk about this in public.
Well, it's one final question on it. Is there a possibility that Mr. Gromyko will refuse to come?
I don't know. I would ask Mr. Gromyko.
Do we care?
I would ask Mr. Gromyko.
Do we care if he refuses to come?
I'm not going to speculate on that, Sam.
All right, Mr. Secretary, moving on, there is a great chill in Soviet-American relations because of this incident. Today, you also tried to present once again two notes to the Soviet government demanding compensation for the victims of the KGTV airliner, and a Soviet official would not accept the notes, even after you warned him that there would be serious consequences if he didn't. What consequences?
Well, I don't know where you heard about the serious consequences.
Well, am I wrong?
I did talk to the Soviets.
Am I wrong?
And I'm not aware of saying there would be serious consequences. What I told the Soviets, and what we have continued to tell the Soviets all along, that it is standard international practice for the Soviet Union to compensate the families and the survivors of the 269 people that are killed. This is a very serious matter. The President of the United States feels very strongly about this. The South Korean government feels strongly about it. The Japanese government feels strongly about it. And we will continue to pursue the question of claims.
How are you going to do that if they refuse to accept the notes?
Now, there are other legal recourses. I don't want to show our hand, but we have options that we can take.
Mr. Secretary,
I want to make very clear, Sam, that we are not going to drop the matter.
All right. Mr. Secretary, the President has said he is responding in a measured fashion to the downing of the airliner, suggesting that there is a step-by-step approach, and you have just said there are other things you can do. Are there any other tough sanctions waiting in the wings?
Well, I think that the word sanctions is overused. We have taken a number of steps along with our allies and friends to demonstrate very convincingly to the Soviets, particularly in the area of civil aviation, that we should get an appropriate apology from the Soviet Union, that they should address the claims question, and also we've taken some steps to ensure that this doesn't happen again. But beyond this, we have made some very important decisions to continue arms control negotiations in Geneva because we think these are in our interest. And I think the key point is that much of our existing policy that's in place, that is maintaining the military balance, intensifying our efforts to control the transfer of technology to the Soviet Union, these are key elements of the Reagan administration policy, and I think the President and many members of Congress feel that it's more important than ever to see these policies implemented.
Did it surprise you when the Soviets announced very categorically that they would make no concessions in Geneva in the disarmament negotiations because of this incident? And do you think it makes any difference there?
No, it didn't surprise me because the Soviet Union has tried with this incident to turn it into a U.S.-Soviet confrontation. And the President is not going to play this game. This is not the United States versus the Soviet Union. This is the Soviet Union versus the world. And they would like to create a climate of fear. They would like to lead people to believe that we're on the edge of a confrontation. The Soviet Union has done a dastardly deed, and the international community demands an accounting of this fact. But we're prepared to work with others, including the Soviet Union, to improve the international civil aviation environment, as well as to continue arms control, because, again, we see this as in our interest.
Can you control the situation, though? Can you fine-tune this so that you punish the Soviets for this action in certain ways, but then, on the other hand, go ahead and negotiate with them and continue to cooperate with them in other ways?
Well, we have interests, and those are very important interests.
Well, you've told us about those. I'm really asking whether you think you can control the way Moscow reacts. Can you fine-tune it so that the Kremlin will accept, on the one hand, the slaps on the wrist or worse, but on the other hand, go ahead with the important bilateral negotiations that you've talked about?
Well, Sam, if they decide they're not prepared to negotiate for arms control, if they conclude that it's not in their interest, then that's their responsibility. But we have important principles at stake here, and I think we have to see these principles through.
How much longer do you think this chill caused by the airliner will last?
I hope it doesn't last too long, but again, that's up to the Soviets. They owe us, they owe the world an apology. They owe us, they owe the world an accounting. And it's up to them how long they want this, the adverse impact of this issue to continue to affect the relationship they have with us and other countries.
Thank you very much, Secretary Burke, for being with us tonight. When we come back, we'll turn to our second topic tonight, divorce mediation. We'll look at how the process works. We'll talk with a husband and wife who've been through the mediation process, and we'll examine the pros and cons of this approach.
Burger King presents a noted hamburger authority.
So you finally did it.
Did what?
Millions of you switched to Burger King. Maybe you switched for a great big juicy Whopper. Maybe you switched for flame broiling. Well, I've got two things to say. First, I'm proud of you. Second, what took you so long?
Aren't you hungry for Burger King now?
Who discovered the Pacific Ocean? I did. No, that was Balboa. I discovered PIP while you wait printing. Years ago, I discovered PIP. People really do make the difference. They're trained in the latest printing techniques and use professional printing presses. And, Jane, what are you carrying there?
Copies of my new manuscript.
Your new manuscript?
You're not the only writer in the family, sweetheart.
Need a winner. Eric's Rib Place in Old Town. Along with his regular luncheon menu, Eric serves the heftiest deli sandwiches in town. Tonight, try dinner at its best at Eric's Rib Place. Savory prime rib, barbecued beef ribs, Eric's famous pork ribs and chicken rib combo. I just can't keep my hands off Eric's ribs. Eric's sampler, beef rib, pork chop, pork ribs, and a quarter chicken. You loved Eric's before. Now there's a lot more to love at Eric's Rib Place, 4263 Taylor in Old Town.
We Americans are so eager to lose weight, we're becoming a nation of meal skippers. In fact, 37% of us who are watching our weight are skipping meals. But that's not smart. Nutrition's too important. That's why there's Figurines. 2 Figurines bars provide the protein, vitamins, and minerals your body needs, so you can skip that fattening meal without skipping nutrition.
Delicious.
When you skip that fattening meal, don't skip nutrition. Skip with Figurines.
Almost every state in the Union now has a simplified, no-fault divorce law, tantamount to divorce by request. No longer must a couple prove in court that one spouse or the other is guilty of abuse or neglect or infidelity or any of the so-called grounds for divorce. But the new laws have not taken divorce out of the courtroom. Thousands of couples every year find themselves in long and bitter legal fights over property settlement and child custody. Nightline correspondent Betty Rollin has a report on a new technique that stresses cooperation rather than confrontation in settling such disputes and tries to eliminate the enormous cost of going to court.
The McGraws, Linda and Dennis of Prior Lake, Minnesota. First they were 2, then they were 4. And now, 18 years after their wedding day, they are 3. Dennis has moved out. Like 1 million other American couples this year, Dennis and Linda are getting a divorce.
This whole divorce is not my choice. I guess I had a lot of anger to all of a sudden be a single parent with 2 teenage children, not by choice. But I think you go along hoping things will get better, and then all of a sudden realizing, no, they're not. This is the way it is.
Once the decision to divorce was final, the McGraws had to figure out how to divide their property, their house, their horses, and the rest. This is the moment that most couples run to lawyers, he to his, she to hers, and the fight begins. If the fight isn't settled, they wind up in court, which usually means more pain, especially when children are involved, and always means more money. But there is another way. It's called mediation. And that's the way the McGraws have chosen to go.
It's all fair and well that I get the house. You think everything? No, no.
Is it, or are you
Well,
just
no, I'm
saying
just, this is what happens to women in divorce. We get the house. Be generous. Now, this is what I'm feeling, Denny. Okay, be generous. You get the house.
Fair,
Denny, I can't eat that house.
But,
okay,
but see, the
this
problem...
Is something, now just hold it, both of you, hold it.
Right,
Stop.
okay.
Stop. Cease, desist.
Okay.
Okay, what I want to hear is, you said, I get the house. Was that a kind of sarcastic statement? Marilyn McKnight is a Minneapolis social worker who began doing mediation in 1978. She and the McGraws meet for 2 hours each week. This is their second session, and they have 3 more to go. The total cost, $850, which is much less than the McGraws would have had to pay 2 lawyers. The McGraws' first task was to define their assets. Now the question is how much money they each need to live. Electricity.
Mine is a budget of $350 a month.
That is awfully strong. I never went over $250
Now
a
wait,
month.
did we or did we not just have a $500 bill above and beyond when you changed the electric?
You're basing it on the way you live, and it's not the way that I ran that house, because I was overly conscious.
We still are. We still are, Denny.
No, you're not.
We did not have
That
any
as
wood.
conscious as I was, because I would...
I think we're more conscious. I have to pay for it.
Well, do you want to split it down the middle and see how your budget goes? It's somewhere between $300 and $350, is that correct?
$325.
So there is some fighting at these sessions, and the McGraws each have retained lawyers to check on the outcome. But because the McGraws are hashing out and settling their differences face-to-face, they feel they have less animosity and more control than if lawyers were doing it for them.
A divorce is not an easy thing to go through. I think it's been one of the toughest emotional turmoils I've ever been through. If Lynn and I can settle between the two of us with a mutual understanding, I think in time down the road with her and the kids and all of our family involved, it would just be a lot more comfortable.
John Haynes is president of the Academy of Family Mediators.
In litigation, each lawyer tries to get the best deal regardless of the consequences of the other one. So you have a winner and a loser. In mediation, you go for the optimum benefit for both parties, and you have a winner and a winner.
Mediation services are available now in most big cities, and more divorcing couples are taking advantage of them. In California, mediation is mandated in any divorce case involving child custody. But there are critics of mediation, and they're mostly lawyers who feel that mediators are unqualified to settle divorces, and that without a lawyer's participation throughout, a client is at risk.
What troubles me very deeply is that the person involved in the mediation process who has less information, fewer bargaining skills, unequal bargaining power, is at a terrific disadvantage in mediation. Often that person is the wife.
But this wife, Linda McGraw, has a different view. She is just as concerned with how she and her children are going to wind up feeling as with what they're going to wind up getting.
You spent a lot of your life with somebody, and you don't want to end that life as you're going to your next life on a bad note. Going through a divorce is not usually civil. And maybe the one big plus about mediation is we are making good attempts at being civil.
This is Betty Rollin for Nightline in Prior Lake, Minnesota.
In a moment, we'll talk with one couple who chose divorce mediation because, among other things, it was so much cheaper.
Hey, Tommy Lasorda. How do you spell relief?
Roger, I love to eat, but I don't always manage my stomach right. For heartburn, I spell relief R-O-L-A-I-D-S.
Wherever I am, for heartburn, it's R-O-L-A-I-D-S.
Rolaids really does spell relief.
Like a sponge, Rolaids antacid medicine consumes 100% of the acid required to give millions 100% relief.
With that batting average, it's R-O-L-A-I-D-S.
For millions of Americans, Rolaids spells 100% relief.
Sometimes the whole world narrows down to just 2 people. That's when it's nice to brush your breath with Dentine. When you meet old friends.
Who's champ? You son of a gun!
When he's just come home.
You're here!
Just being together, that's so much nicer when you brush your breath with Dentine. Not even mouthwash can freshen your breath better than when you're chewing lively, long-lasting Dentine.
When the whole wide world for you narrows down to just you two. Brush your breath with Dentine.
Remember that little apartment on Maple Street?
I loved that apartment. Oh, those candlelight dinners.
We couldn't afford to go out.
Oh, with 2 babies at home, it was hard.
They got so big, along with our mortgage.
Oh.
But we've done okay.
I've got everything I need right here.
Well, I suppose I'll have to take this back then.
Don't you dare.
She married you for richer or poorer. Let her know how it's going.
A diamond and forever I give to you. When you can take to the road with confidence, that's performance.
Get credit terms at zero down. At Performance, we give same-day credit approval. Operators are on duty right now tonight. Call 278-0507 for your credit check. You could actually be driving your new or used zero down car tomorrow. Call 278-0507 right now.
Save up to 50% off. It's Waterbed Emporium's gigantic year-end clearance with up to 50% off. We must clear out over $500,000 in merchandise, and we'd rather sell it than count it. So this week, save up to 50%. Complete waterbed starting at only $135. 6-drawer storage pedestal starting at $59.95. Satin comforters only $39.95. Up to 50% off and even more on odds and ends. One-of-a-kind and slightly damaged merchandise. But hurry, when it's gone at Waterbed Emporium.
Joining us now from our affiliate KSTP in Minneapolis, St. Paul are Jim and Kate Bowers. After 19 years of marriage, Mr. and Mrs. Bowers are getting a divorce. They have just completed their divorce mediation proceedings. First of all, tell me exactly why, instead of going to 2 lawyers and letting them draw up an agreement, you went the route of mediation. Mrs. Bowers?
Well, I think for me it was a couple of things. First of all, I wanted to have a place where I could talk to Jim and have a third person there to help me say what I wanted to say and to be heard. And secondly, I think one of my main purposes was to keep my relationship with my son, which was extremely important. I was the one that was moving out of the house, and I wanted to make sure that the agreement included looking out for that relationship. And also, I wanted to save some money. I thought that if I could talk about it in front of somebody else, that it would go a lot faster and a little bit more productively.
All right, Mr. Bowers, what were the issues in your settlement? It was the custody of your son, Perry. What about property? Tell us a little bit about it.
Okay. The property was probably the easiest issue that we had to take care of. In fact, the mediator sent us home with the assignment of looking over the household goods, and we split those on our own, and but we still had a house, and we had some other assets that we had to split. And
were there any tough issues, any real tough ones?
The tough issues were the emotional ones, and the mediator, even though he wasn't a social worker by any means, he kept us working at the mechanical parts of our divorce as opposed to the emotional ones, and we both were seeing counselors for the emotional parts of the
Mrs.
divorce.
Bowers, tell us about the mediator. How did he work? Did you two fight when you were in his presence?
Well, at times we did, but mainly we just, he brought up, he kind of set the format for us, and then we would talk about the issues, and if we got off on some emotional subject, or I can remember one time I got very upset and started crying, and at that point we took a break, and we all went out of the room and walked around for a while and then came back. And I always felt like the mediator was an advocate for both of us. I never felt like he took sides, and I think that's one of the most important things a mediator can do.
Mr. Bowers, as the two of you sit together tonight, even though I suppose in about a month you're going ahead with the papers, You seem to have an amicable relationship under the circumstances. My question is, do you think for couples who split apart and say, I hate you and I hate you, that mediation is the right route? Could they really sit down with a mediator?
Well, I guess my first impression of what you're saying is that that kind of an issue would be the kind that they should not mediate over, but maybe seek other kinds of counseling for rather than a mediator.
Mrs. Bowers, how do you think a couple that really has a very bitter feeling toward one another would react to mediation?
Well, I think they have to decide what they want. I mean, the most important thing for me was my parenting of Perry, and also to save money. And the emotional issues that I had with Jim, I had to put aside.
By the way, how did you work out the custody for Perry, your son?
Well, we have joint custody, and